You're listening to Fanfiction Factory, the show that takes you to parts unknown with familiar faces and familiar places. And now, he's once drank 5-hour energies to see if he could travel through time, Draco from Gatorbox.
Yeah, that's for the record, by the way, that did not work. I actually just stayed up for a week straight and didn't get any sleep, and I felt miserable. So don't try that at home. Nintendolt, everybody. Nintendolt, thank you for the intro. I appreciate it. Welcome to Fanfiction Factory, everyone. As stated, I am, of course, Draco from Gatorbox, and in this episode of the podcast, we're going to be reading several stories, unlike the first one where we just read one that was mine. We've selected 3 short stories to read this episode that all center around grimdark fanfics about children's animated cartoons that focus on dinosaurs. It's a little something that we like to call Jurassic Dark. These are the jokes, folks. So, you might as well laugh now because it's only downhill from here. I mean that. So coming up first in this podcast, the first story we're going to read is called When the World Ends. It is a Land Before Time fanfic that was published on December 4th, 2010. Warm, fresh summer air was all around the hill. The cloudless sky was dotted with an unaccountable amount of lesser lights, and a soft breeze ruffled the grass and the leaves of the trees of the great valley. On top of the hill, gazing over the valley, were 2 young dinosaurs, a longneck and a 3-horn. "It's a beautiful night," Littlefoot said, gazing up at the sky. He was growing up so fast now. His neck was getting longer, his body growing. Soon he would no longer be a child, but a young adult. "Yeah, it is," Sarah replied. She, like Littlefoot, was going through a lot of changes. Her horns were starting to grow and her body color was getting darker, almost becoming the light gray of a fully grown 3-horn. "There are so many lesser lights falling tonight," Littlefoot pondered. "Why do you think that is?" Sarah looked up as well and replied, "I don't know. Is it bothering you?" Littlefoot didn't reply immediately, instead lying down, keeping his gaze aimed upward. Even when lying down, his head was almost above Sarah's. "I just have a strange feeling, that's all," he said. For a while neither of them spoke, just looking up at the vast expanse of the sky above them. Every few seconds or so a streak of white appeared in the sky, another lesser light falling from its place. "Wouldn't it be great if we could just stay like this forever?" Littlefoot asked. Here in the Great Valley, watching the night sky from this hill. Sarah turned her head to give him a questioning look. "Why are you so mushy all of a sudden?" she asked jokingly, although an edge of concern sounded through in her voice. Suddenly a flash of white light cut off whatever Littlefoot was going to say. It originated from the mysterious beyond, far beyond the protective walls of the Great Valley. "That was too bright for Skyfire," Sarah muttered, her heart suddenly beating a lot faster than it had before. Littlefoot got up, straining to see over the sheer walls that kept the valley safe from sharp teeth. The Great Valley was no longer quiet now. All around the hill, dinosaurs were murmuring about the flash of light. Then, faintly, the earth started to shake. The rumbling became heavier with every passing second, and Littlefoot could see a cloud of smoke and dust rapidly approaching the walls of the Great Valley. "Littlefoot, what's going on?" Sarah asked, sounding scared now. "A stampede?" Littlefoot wondered aloud, before frowning and saying, "No, it's too fast for that." His eyes widened as he turned to Sarah. "We have to get out of here now. Come on, we have to get the others." The world was rent apart by a deafening roar, a roar louder than that of any sharp tooth. Littlefoot and Sarah turned behind them, only to see the protective barrier of the Great Valley ripped to pieces by a monstrous force, a force neither of them understood. They didn't have time to turn around again before the wall of debris hit them. Pain, heat, disorientation, all drowned out by that horrible, deafening noise, the noise of the planet itself screaming out in agony. Littlefoot felt his body being battered, shaken, thrown, and burned, flaming embers and pieces of glowing rock battering him as he flew through the air, kept up by the unimaginable force of the storm. When he thought he couldn't take any more, he was roughly thrown down onto the ground, rolling a couple of times over the cracked and broken rock. As the rumbling noise distanced itself from him and his head slowly started to clear the noise, he became aware of the pain that ripped through his body. Groaning, he opened his eyes, amazed to find that they still worked after the beating. He turned his head to inspect his aching body. He was covered in bleeding cuts and burn marks, his dark scales stained with blood. His right rear leg stuck out under a weird angle and wouldn't move when he tried. Trying to dismiss the pain and failing for the most part, Littlefoot pushed himself up off the ground onto his 3 functioning legs. He raised his neck, which had miraculously survived the ordeal with no more injuries than the rest of his body. He looked around, horrified at what he saw. The great valley, or at least what was left of it, was ablaze. Most of the trees had been uprooted, the crystal-clear water had been polluted and drained by rocks and debris, and dead and injured dinosaurs were everywhere. Seeing all the wounded around him, Littlefoot thought of Sarah. "Sarah!" He tried to shout, but he choked on the word and coughed, forcing him to take several deep, painful breaths before trying again. "Sarah! Where are you?" He started limping in the direction he'd been blown by the storm, hoping Sarah wasn't too far away. Soon enough, he saw the silhouette of a 3-horn lying on its side amidst shattered rocks and a charred tree. He came closer, afraid of what he might find. "Sarah?" he asked softly, fearfully. She opened her eyes and gave Littlefoot a weak smile. "You're okay," she muttered. She looked even worse than Littlefoot. One of her horns was broken off completely, and she was covered in deep cuts and burns, the worst one going horizontally across her back, just below her shoulder blades. "Come on, Sarah, get up," Littlefoot said softly. "We have to find the others. We have to see if they're okay." Sarah looked at Littlefoot solemnly and said, "Go without me." Littlefoot took a step back, confused by Sarah's words. "What do you mean? I'm not leaving you here," he said, a determined look appearing on his face. Sarah smiled. "Always so stubborn," she whispered, wincing when she shifted onto her stomach. "I'm not going anywhere without you," Littlefoot repeated. "Now get up. You're always so tough," he said softly, now failing to keep up his determined look. "Littlefoot, I can't move," Sarah whispered. Littlefoot shook his head. "Of course you can. You rolled onto your stomach, right? If you can do that, you can walk too." Sarah looked away, not wanting to look Littlefoot in the eyes. "I can't move below my front legs. I can't even feel anything below my front legs." "Then I'll carry you," Littlefoot said, once again determined. "Stop being so childish," Sarah said angrily. "Your leg is broken. You can't carry me. I'm not trying to be noble here, Littlefoot. I just want to spare you any more pain," she finished softly, her voice trembling. "How will leaving you make me feel any better?" Littlefoot asked, boring his eyes into Sarah's and seeing the fear and sadness reflected in them. "I don't want you to see me dying," she whispered, her vision becoming blurry as tears formed in her eyes. She blinked rapidly and shook her head to clear away the tears, but they kept forming. "Don't say that! You'll be fine if we just..." Littlefoot couldn't find the words as he tried, desperately, to find a way to convince Sarah everything would be okay. But now, with the great valley a wasteland and the earth still shaking and rumbling, with the sky thick with smoke and dust in the air painful to breathe, the notion that things would be fine was laughably naive. "Just go, Littlefoot," Sarah said, trying to sound firm. "Get away, Longneck, and let me die in peace." "Why do you want me gone so badly?" Littlefoot asked angrily, weird to think he would be capable of that particular emotion at the time. Sarah smiled inwardly. Didn't Littlefoot understand? She didn't want him gone. Not at all. She wanted him close. Closer than anyone else. But she didn't want her best friend to see her dying, to have to live with the image burned into his mind forever. "I'm not going," he said. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving you, Sarah. And I never will." Again Sarah's eyes overflowed with tears, tears formed by emotions that were all surfacing now, in a completely different way than she had hoped they would. "Littlefoot, come closer," she said, making a small gesture with her head. Littlefoot came closer, bending his neck down so she wouldn't have to get up to talk to him. With a huge effort of will, Sarah raised herself up on her front legs and looked Littlefoot in the eye. She gently nudged his head with hers before sinking to the ground again. "I'm sorry we can never be closer than that," she said, her voice filled with regret. Now Littlefoot's eyes were tearing up as well, finally realizing that Sarah would not make it, that she would die right in front of him just like his mother had. "Don't be stupid, we can be closer than that." But even Littlefoot knew the futility of this lie, and he fell silent, just staring at Sarah, his best friend who was so much more to him than just his best friend. "Sarah, I love you," he whispered. Sarah smiled shakily and replied so softly that Littlefoot hardly heard her. "I love you too." "Please don't go," Littlefoot said softly, not even bothering to fight his tears anymore. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "I want to stay with you, so badly." She stopped talking, groaning in pain now. She looked at Littlefoot again through blurry eyes, blinking to see her friend in focus one more time. "Littlefoot, thank you for being here, for being my friend, for loving me. Thank you." She lay down again, Her body felt so hot, so painful, but now everything was going dark, and the pain receded. "Sarah! Sarah!" Littlefoot nudged her with his head, but his friend didn't move. He looked into her eyes, but they saw nothing. And that's the end of that story. See, I don't know when I read these, I don't know if it's appropriate for me to laugh at certain parts, because I tried to deliver these with as much intense sincerity as I believe the authors tried to put into these stories. But that was When the World Ends from 2010. Somebody takes their Land Before Time very seriously. Let's check the reviews and see if there's anything, see what the Peanut Gallery has to say. Here's one commenter saying, "What can I say? Wow. Just wow. This was so sad. I bawled like a baby when I first read it and still do each time. You're a much better writer than you give yourself credit for. Only a truly powerful tragedy can make me cry, and those come far and few. Death at a young age has got to be one of the scariest things to happen to anyone, and this was well captured. So was their friendship. The two were in character the entire story, which made it more convincing. All in all, this was a great story, and I hope to see more of your writing around." Here's a comment from somebody sticking up for the cast who doesn't seem to like this story. There's no rating system on the fanfiction website, I should mention. There's no stars or thumbs up and thumbs down. But if there was, this would definitely be a thumbs down from someone. Why? This is all caps, by the way. Why did Sarah have to die like that? Well, I am glad Littlefoot lives, and I think a sequel should be made and let Littlefoot have new adventures and met new friends and new villains, and his old friends Dookie and Petrie and Spike and Ruby and Chomper and Allie should return, and his arch enemy Redclaw should return too, and Screech and Thud also, and I hope he will ran into the ghost of Sarah. Woo, scary! Again, that's all caps. There's no punctuation there. There's misspellings, of course. So woo, scary. Well, like I said, that was When the World Ends. That's just one of a few fanfics we have planned for this episode, so stick around, keep listening, as the next one is right around the corner. Moving right along, the next fanfic we've picked out for this episode is titled There Will Be No Survivors, and it is a fanfic about the cartoon Dinosaur Train, which is not really a show that I'm all that familiar with. I don't even know what channel it airs on. I want to say PBS, but I'm not confident in that answer. I think I'm a little too old for this one. I know about Land Before Time because I was a kid when that came out, so that's one thing. But this is something else. Here is There Will Be No Survivors. It was published October 12th, 2019. It was another day on the train, and Shiny, Tiny, Dawn, and Buddy all hopped onto the train as their parents followed. They were all laughing at something Dawn had said as they got on. It was a cute family moment, but I couldn't smile. I watched as the rest of the dinosaurs got onto the train and sighed. My stomach hurt, and my vision was blurry. I hadn't eaten in a few days because I was busy on the train, but I was starting to regret turning down the midnight snacks Mom had offered me. "Sonny?" I turned around to see Mom coming to me, looking worried. "Are you all right?" I leaned into her hand as she stroked my cheek. "I'm fine." I shivered when her hand got close to my mouth. I felt... "Are you sure?" Mom took my face in between her hands and I jerked away, my breath becoming uneven as I started to hyperventilate. I didn't feel right. Everything was off, just a bit. My eyes wouldn't focus, my hands were shaking, and Mom was starting to look... appetizing. Something was starting to tug at my stomach, making me want to throw up. "Mom?" She looked terrified. I was about to ask her what was wrong when she started backing away, muttering to herself. "Mom?" Not again. "Not my son," she kept repeating as she backed up into the doors which opened to let her out. Once the doors closed, she ran through the corridor to the carriage that the Pteranodon family had gone into. For some reason, I felt as though I needed to get the train moving now or everyone would leave. I yelled, "All aboard!" out the window and closed all the doors on the train so no one could get out. My stomach was screaming at me at this point, and I let a smile creep onto my face. This was going to be fun. I knew I was the smartest dinosaurs on the train, other than Mom, so this was going to be easy. I decided to go for someone who wouldn't see it coming, someone who was too stupid to know what was happening. As I made my way down to the carriage that had the Pteranodon family in it, knowing Mom would be there, it was where I needed to be careful, smart, and sneaky, 3 of the things that make me a Trudon, a carnivorous Trudon. "Welcome to the dinosaur train," I greeted everyone as I entered the carriage, and they all clapped and shouted. I grinned. I already had their attention. "Mr. Conductor! Mr. Conductor!" Buddy shouted as he raised his hand. Tiny and Shiny looked at Buddy with interest as Don kept picking at his beak. It was a shame what was going to happen to them, but it just couldn't be helped. Not really. "Yes, Buddy?" I leaned down to his level and smiled with all my teeth, and he matched it with one of his own. I felt bad about what I was going to do, but I needed this. I really, really needed this. Buddy stared at me for a while, then looked at the floor when I didn't look away. "Are there any kinds of dinosaurs that eat other dinosaurs?" he whispered. I stumbled back a bit as Buddy's mother gasped and whispered something in Buddy's ear. I hadn't been expecting that, even though I knew it was going to be asked eventually. It just happened to be today. How sad. "I'm so sorry. Buddy didn't mean to be rude, Mr. Conductor. Right, Buddy?" Buddy mumbled a sorry as he looked down at his feet. Tiny and Shiny were staring at Buddy in shock, but Don just kept doing what he was doing, uninterested. I laughed. "It's nothing to worry about, Miss Pteranodon. I'm sure Buddy didn't mean anything by it. He's just a curious kid." My eyes flickered to the back of the carriage over to my mom, who was sitting in an empty seat. I smiled at her to show that I wouldn't hurt her, if she didn't get in my way. "It's just, we know what kind of dinosaur you are, and we know you wouldn't do us any harm, but we're just worried about Buddy's thoughts wandering a bit too much, if you know what I mean." Mr. Pteranodon winced when he said the last part. That's when Don spoke up, finally. "I need to go to the bathroom," Don said as he started getting up. Miss Pteranodon got up to let him out, and I smirked. It wasn't long until my hunger would be quenched. I started to follow Don out of the carriage. "I do too. Please excuse me." Don was already in the bathroom by then, so I quickly left the carriage as well. Buddy looked sad to see me go, but I assured him I wouldn't be gone long. I opened the door to the bathroom quietly, making sure that Don wouldn't hear me come in. I was so close to getting my food. I didn't need to ruin it now. Soon Don was done and he came out of the stall and started washing his hands, singing a little song to himself. It was cute, but it didn't make me feel guilty about what I was about to do. Then I turned off the lights and waited for the scream. There was nothing. Just silence. Then, out of the darkness, came a strained, "Buddy? Dad?" It took all my willpower not to laugh, so I smiled instead, imagining my sharp teeth that were soon to be covered in blood. The thought of it made me shiver with excitement. I snuck up on Don since I can see in the dark, and then gave the urge to laugh. I covered Don's mouth so he couldn't scream. He struggled, sure, but it wasn't enough to get me to stop. I was strong and smart. I knew what I was doing. Shoving Don onto the floor with his back against it, I grinned and said, "Don't scream. It'll only make it hurt worse." Then I ripped open his chest and ate. The blood was warm against the cool skin, and the meat was fresh. I had never had something so delicious. It was like my eyes had been opened up to new possibilities, and I needed more. I threw Don's carcass against the wall, which it hit with a loud thud. Then I went to turn on the lights. With the lights on, I could see the rich red blood that covered the floor more clearly. It made me grin. Nothing could escape me now that I'd been fed. Once I had washed off the blood that had gotten on me in the sink, I went back into the carriage, only to find that there was no one. I would have been disappointed if I didn't know better. They were all here. Mom had tried to evacuate the carriage, but she knew there wouldn't be time for everyone to get out, so she had told everyone to hide. In this train, the only places where you could hide was the roof, the bathroom, and behind your seat. I tapped my foot impatiently on the floor, waiting for a cough, maybe a whimper. I might be smart, but I can't tell if someone's behind a seat or not just by looking at it. "Sonny?" My head whipped around and I saw Irma coming out from behind some cherries and my mouth watered. Perfect. "You don't have to do this." Irma came up to me and stopped with her face only inches from mine. It was really hard not to think about how good she would taste, so I didn't resist, and I ignored her as she went on and on about how I was a good person. "And you have a choice, you don't have to do this." By this point, she was out of breath because she had gotten so worked up. It was nice to see that someone could care so much and be so brave to stand up to me, but it didn't really do anything to change my mind. "Oh, Irma." I stepped forward and she backed up. I could see the flicker of fear in her eyes and decided that was all I needed as motivation to keep going. Sweet, loving, caring Irma. With each word I took a step, and eventually she was backed up against the wall of the train and she was breathing heavily. I smiled at her, and Emma stopped breathing. I licked my lips. "It's a shame that your bravery, your speech, all of it, it was just a waste of time that led to something much, much more beautiful." And I dug in. The screams of agony and terror ringing in my ears made me smile as I ripped apart the tough skin of Irma's now lifeless body with my razor-sharp teeth. I finally felt as though I could let myself be free, let myself enjoy this for as long as I needed to. Once I was finished, I went after the pteranodon family. I was in a daze as I ate. Nothing was going through to my head but faint signals of eat, 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 eat. And I did. Well, like the title says, there will be no survivors, so there's that. Like I said, I don't know who any of those characters are, so I assume that's just the train conductor just viciously eating children, and I was like, wow, it doesn't get much edgier than that. So, I know like Dinosaur Train, I know is made for kids. So when you read something like this, and this is written, I'm not going to say, when I say it's written well, I'm not meaning like, oh yeah, this is a really solid piece of literature. When I say it's written well, I mean, it's formatted correctly. It's, spaced appropriately. It's got correct punctuation. It's written by somebody competent. So somebody out there watched Dinosaur Train, or they grew up with Dinosaur Train in the back of their head, and they decided that it would be a good idea to write a fanfic of the train conductor just devouring everyone. And I assume the train conductor, I think the fanfic said he was a Trudon, which I don't know what kind of dinosaur that is, so I was thinking maybe he's like a velociraptor or something. Anyways, let's check the comments to see what other people have to say about this, if anything. One comment just says, beautiful. And then another comment says, okay, so Dinosaur Train was like my childhood. And when I saw this, I was like, wait, who's who again? Then I Googled it and I was like, oh. Then I read this and I was like, oh. This was very well written, to be honest. And when Buddy was like, are there any dinosaurs that eat other dinosaurs? I had to laugh like, oh, Buddy, if you knew. So that was formatted very strangely with very weird choice of emphasis. So that was There Will Be No Survivors, a grimdark Dinosaur Train, edgy, predatory fanfic. I don't know what to make of it. Again, I'm not familiar with the source material. I'm a little too old for Dinosaur Train. Land Before Time was a little bit more my speed. But coming up, we've got another oldie show right around the corner. It's Dinosaurs. So hang tight. We're going to get that last story fired up, and we're going to deliver it straight to your ear holes. Alrighty, so like I said, we've got one more story this episode to feature, and it's based upon Jim Henson's Dinosaurs, which was a TV sitcom that aired in the 90s. A lot of people grew up with this one. It was a relatively funny show, followed the exploits of the Sinclair family, named as such because the real-life Sinclair Oil Company uses a Brontosaurus as their logo, because gasoline is just dinosaur juice essentially, so that's the joke. The show was also famous for its character Baby, who had those annoying catchphrases like I'm the baby, gotta love me, and not the mama. Yeah, I couldn't stand Baby, but that didn't stop me from buying the entire TV series on DVD when it came out, so it looks like I'm the biggest loser here. Anyways, this story takes place at the ending of the television series, and those of you who just casually watched Dinosaurs might not be aware of how the show actually ends. The company that Earl Sinclair works for caused so much pollution to the planet that it caused an ice age. It actually caused the opposite of global warming, something that very real that we're dealing with right now. Sorry if you thought you could get away from that conversation on Fanfiction Factory. It's everywhere. So there's an ice age that starts to happen, and in the last episode of the show, it basically ends on a cliffhanger, but all the characters presumably die. Like, for real. the way that it's left on the cliffhanger and with the changing weather, you know that they're not long for this world. And that's how they decided to end this upbeat show. So this story is titled Beginning of the End, and it was published on May 19th, 2012, and it takes place basically right after the ending of the television series. This is a really short one. We're just tacking it on at the end of this episode, to fill time, because it's just so absurd that we wanted to share it with you all. So here is the beginning of the end. Good night and goodbye. Those were the last words they would ever hear from the outside world. Robbie stared at the blank television screen, unable to believe this was the end, though he always knew. His mind drifted back and he thought of the time he asked his dad what they were counting down to. He smirked bitterly. Well, now they knew. They huddled together in coats and blankets, usually in silence. It was hell, having to look at the others and see the look in their eyes, the look of fear, knowing, and anxiousness in each face. Even Baby seemed to understand now. He didn't joke or play as he often did. He sat with the others in silence and played with the toy now and then to pass the time. Days passed and it got colder, darker. Grandma Ethel was the first to go. She froze to death in her sleep. Robbie watched as his dad took her out of the room before Baby woke up. He gritted his teeth and clenched his hand together. He remembered saving her on her 72nd birthday from being hurled off the cliff, and now she was gone. As his father came back in a few minutes later, he saw a look in his eyes that he hated. A mix of grief, of sorrow, and guilt. He swallowed hard, looking away. He wondered how their friends were doing. Spike, Uncle Roy, and Monica. He even wondered about Mr. Richfield, who had gotten them all into this mess in the first place. A few more days passed and Baby began to get sick. Robbie couldn't believe this. First his grandma and now his baby brother. He remembered idly, back when everything was fine, and how his teacher talked about survival of the fittest. At the time he couldn't have cared, but now it meant everything. Baby looked at Robbie, sensing his feelings. He crawled out of their mother's lap and into Robbie's. "Why is Robbie sad?" he asked. Robbie sighed. "I'm just a little down." "About us leaving?" "Yeah." "It'll be okay," Baby said with such confidence that Robbie had to ask. "How do you figure?" "We'll still be together. Robbie said so," Baby said, looking up at him. Robbie bit his lip as he stared down at his brother. He hugged him to his chest and smiled a little. "Yeah, that's right," he whispered. "We'll always be together. Always." And that's the end of the beginning of the end. There's a couple of reviews. Let's check the reviews and see what people have to say about this. There's not many comments on this fanfic, so there's really only one to pick out and highlight, and it says, "Can you write multi-chapter about how they all die, but have them actually struggle to survive, trying not to starve or freeze to death?" It would be interesting. It'd be interesting if herbivore dinosaurs like Robbie and Dave broke their moral code and actually ate meat, and even Spike would break down depressed after the accident. So, let me just repeat the beginning of that again. Can you write multi-chapter about how they all die, but have them actually struggle to survive, trying not to starve or freeze to death? It's like top 10 fucked up things to say. Can you write a series about this, about how they all die? I mean, I know Grandma Ethel's already kicked the bucket, but I want to see how each and every one of these characters that I've become so invested in over the years, I want to see how they all die. That's really the only comment worth pointing out. The other ones just say, "Oh, that was sweet. Love the Sinclair family." Other one says, "Awesome addition to a depressing but somewhat good TV finale." So there's just mostly just one-liner comments. So there's not really a lot of gold in the comments section there. But that was the beginning of the end. Of all the stuff that's been written about dinosaurs, I figured this would be something great to kind of bookend our Jurassic Dark podcast episode of Fanfiction Factory. There's not really enough meat, I guess pun intended. There's not really enough meat on the bones of this story for me to really kind of get a firm understanding of it. It's just It's just Robbie Sinclair reflecting on everybody dying pretty much. And Earl realizing what his company that he worked for did. Earl was never like directly involved with it. He was just one of the grunts who showed up to work and, you know, wore a hard hat, and that was basically, he worked in the refineries essentially. So he's not to blame. It's, you know, it's the people up top. And I guess I also picked this one out because this is kind of something that we're dealing with right now. This is a more contemporary issue. We're just going in the opposite direction. Also, there's no dinosaurs that are going to freeze to death, so I don't know. So that wraps up this installment of Fanfiction Factory. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I certainly appreciate it a ton. Not every episode is going to have multiple stories featured in it. It's just going to depend on what we find for each one and what the theme or whatever of the episode is going to be. Sometimes we'll just have one long story. Sometimes we'll have 2 or 3 short stories like we did this time. In this case, this was our first, you know, multi-story episode. So we're still, you know, this is very early in the podcast, so we're still kind of working out the kinks and we're learning as we go. Spotify doesn't have a way for you to leave us comments, but you can also search up Fanfiction Factory on YouTube and listen to us there. And those you can comment on a YouTube video. So if you like the show, if you don't like it, if there's something you would like to change, you can leave us direct feedback via YouTube. But if not, you know, keep it locked and loaded right here on Spotify, and we'll be back at you with the next installment of Fanfiction Factory. I'm Draco from Gatorbox, signing off.
Fanfiction Factory is a production of Gator Company. To support the podcast, please visit patreon.com/Gatorbox to make a pledge today. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next journey.